So, if you're new to our presentations, this is the first online presentation of this year and the first one we've done in quite a long time now. So, we're really lucky to be joined by Bronwyn from the Shubenacadie Wildlife Park, who is awesome for lots of reasons, but one of them is because she knows a lot about bears, and that's what she's going to be talking to us today about. So, without wasting any more time, I'm going to hand the virtual floor right over to Bronwyn. Bronwyn, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and what you're going to talk about today?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. My name is Bronwyn Conrad Martin. I am the education coordinator with Shubenacadie Provincial Wildlife Park. I'm very fortunate to be able to speak with you today on bears. I'm very passionate about bears. I spend a lot of time working with biologists in Nova Scotia and other areas across Canada, just learning about bears. And my main role at the park is to take all this scientific information and break it down into presentations like what we're going to be experiencing today, so that we can just help everyone kind of understand a little bit more about the wildlife that we have here in Nova Scotia, and most likely that we have in our backyard, because there's many, many bears in Nova Scotia. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Just bear with me a moment. I want to make sure that I have everything set up properly. Okay, Becky, does that look okay to you?
Looks good.
Perfect. So welcome. Thank you for being willing to spend your Saturday morning with me. I'm very grateful that we're going to be spending about an hour together this morning. First on my screen is a setup that we will often take, our nature interpreters and myself will take to many facilities and schools to just allow everyone to experience the realities of bears a little bit closer. So on the screen, we have a bear pelt. This bear is, it's a little bit smaller than what our average bears would be in Nova Scotia. So our bears in Nova Scotia are going to be around, once they hit adult stage, they're going to be between 100 and 600 pounds, with the average being about 350, 400 pounds. Now, of course, bears can be a lot smaller, they can be a lot bigger, but that's just to give you the just sort of that basic idea. We have our plaster molds. You'll see a large track there. That's the size of a larger bear. And then we have a track on the right-hand side. It looks very much like a barefoot of a human track almost. And that's what's known as a yearling. So a yearling bear is between the ages of 1 to 3, and their feet tend to be quite a bit smaller. And in the middle, of course, we have our bear scat, so that's our rubber mold. And then we have a bear skull, which we're able to see the teeth a little bit at the very end. So to start, before I talk about bears, we're going to talk a little bit about the big picture of bears and the reality of just wildlife in Nova Scotia. So wildlife is protected in Nova Scotia. Every province and every country is going to have a different level of protection for each of their species. But right from the get-go, bears and all wildlife are protected in Nova Scotia. There's many people involved with this, and there's lots of laws around protection of wildlife. So I have a few of them just listed on the screen. And so what these things mean is that these are agreements between different groups, provincial, federal, government groups, as well as conservation groups, and really the everyday person like you. Everyone has a role to play when it comes to the protection of wildlife in Nova Scotia. So that's known as shared stewardship, when everyone has a little bit of responsibility. And even you right now watching, there is something that you can do to help wildlife, and maybe you'll learn about it here. Maybe you're already doing it. I do want to mention that kind of in the middle of the screen, it says Nova Scotia Wildlife Act and Regulations. That's a document that a lot of judges and things will use if they have to provide fines for people that might be mistreating animals. It's like parameters, or it's kind of the go-to document, the set rules that are in place right now. It takes a lot to change these documents. A lot of people need to be involved. But in this document, it says that it's actually illegal to bring wildlife of any sort into like your home, to keep it as your own, to bring it into classrooms. There's all kinds of different things that we wouldn't even really think about, that I didn't even know about until I started working at the park. So bears are protected underneath this act. And this act is actually only 33 years old. It only came into place in 1989. And before that, it was common for people to go out and actually trap a bear cub and keep it the way that they would a dog, to use it as like a guard dog. So we've come a long way. We're still very new in what we're learning about. And every day we learn something different. We become a little bit better. So when it comes to bears and where they live, so bears, they're found all across Canada and North America. The black bear is the only species that we have in Nova Scotia. The black bear is found, of course, across Canada, and the actions of a black bear here tend to be more docile than the actions of a black bear who might be out west, because they have to compete against larger bears. So they have to be a little bit more aggressive. But here, they're the only bear species. And so they're kind of the top notch of the bear world here. And they're a little bit more relaxed, which is really nice. Black bears, they tend to be solitary, meaning that they unless they're in their breeding season or they're a mother with cubs, they tend to just be on their own. And they do have a territory that they protect, and they're protecting that no different than any other species would protect their territory to make sure they have enough food, shelter, water, and space. Those are kind of the four needs that every species will need. They tend to live in forested areas, as I have here. Now, this picture that I have here is actually an area where there were, I believe, 2 to 3 black bears that would move in and out of this area. I'm such a fan of nature that I very safely will go with the group, and we'll just sit in the woods and we'll just listen to see what species are there, and try and just figure out, whose territory are we in. So I will remind everyone that when you go into the woods, even if you're going on a trail, you're actually going into wildlife's home. So it's like a gift that we get to go in and experience wildlife, but we just have to be cautious about how we leave that space and how we enter that space. If we're like really noisy and loud going to that space, it can be very stressful for our species. So what do we do at the park for our bears? So we have a male and female bear at the park. They're 8 or 9 years old, and they were actually orphaned and have been with the park since they were babies. So they're twins. So if you've ever been to the park and you've seen our bears, our male is above average size and our female is below average size. So it does give you a good idea of kind of the bear size. And our male bear, when he stretches, he can actually stretch up and link his top claws around the very, very top of the enclosure and just scratch his back. It's a little bit terrifying if you're not used to seeing them, but they're very calm. They're very relaxed, unless there's a lot of people making loud noises and screaming at them, because they've always grown up at the park and they've always recognized that humans are safe for them. And so we like to talk about that a little bit, that we try and provide the best opportunity for our wildlife that we have at the park. And at the park, we don't bring in wildlife unless it absolutely has to be there. So these bears, their mother was hit by a car, and so we had space to bring in these 2 orphan bears to so we could use them for education purposes, but also to provide a good life for them. because the reality is that the way that bears and many other species work, if there's orphan animals, the chances of them surviving is very small because they just don't have someone to teach them the life skills. So our male bear here, he's standing up on a tree. He's doing some stretches, and you can see that his claws are stretched out. And that's just sort of, the bears are constantly, they're moving. They don't move very fast unless they have to, but they're constantly moving and kind of stretching and keeping their body active the way that we do. But they're also trying to conserve their energy and their food supplies, because that's kind of like their whole goal is to just build up as much body fat as they can to make it through the winter. So in our enclosures, we make sure that we have lots of ground that they can dig in and mud for them to cool down in, because bears actually don't have the capacity to cool their bodies down. They need to rely on mud and water. And on the right here, you can see that it's a hot day at the park, and we do have a pool that the bears can cool down in. So when you're out and about and you might be in bear territory, rivers and lakes and different things like that, and sometimes ponds or actually pools in people's backyard will attract a bear if there's a bear in the area, because they're looking for a way that they can cool down. So what do they eat? They're omnivores, so they eat meat and they eat vegetation. This is our bear at the park, yawning, but I thought it was good to just sort of show, their jaws can open really wide, and then we have a bear skull on the right here. You'll notice that the front teeth, canine teeth is what we call them, those are meant for ripping meat apart, and then the back teeth are meant for chewing the vegetation. So bears they're large, and I mean, really, to look at, they're very adorable, but they are predators. So what that means is that if there's a fawn that's just been born and it's just lying there gently, a bear will actually hunt and eat that fawn, or it will hunt and eat a baby calf, or hunt and eat a baby sheep. It doesn't want to exert a lot of energy when it's searching for food. So it's going to go for the things that are there and that are not going to have an opportunity to run very far, very fast from them. So bears tend to be in conflict with, farmers that might have sheep and baby calves and things like that. But they will, they do prefer berries. They're just going to go for whatever's there. They don't want to waste a lot of energy. So blueberry fields will often have bears in them, raspberries, they're going to eat pine cones and that type of stuff. And they're slow eaters, so they'll just lie down in an area like a blueberry field, and they will just kind of army crawl their way through to the next place and eat. And then they'll army crawl and eat. And they will remember where this food source is, and they'll keep coming back. So this is one of our bears just doing some stretches. I want to talk about hibernation. Bears are not true hibernators. Many people think that they are. They do experience body changes, though. So to back up a bit, the only true hibernators that we have in Nova Scotia are our groundhogs and our little brown bats. And our little brown bats are on our species at risk list. So we're trying to help bring them back. And what happened with them is that their hibernation cycle kept being broken because of the white nose syndrome. It would wake them up and they would have to use a lot of their energy reserves and wouldn't have enough to make it through to spring. But with bears, we don't have to worry about that because they've spent so much time right from the time that they wake up till the time that they go into their deep naps in the late fall, early winter, they are building up those body stores and body reserves and building up the fat in their body so that they can take these long, deep naps. So their body temperature, it'll drop a little bit. Their breathing will drop a little bit. But if it's a mild day, like so today is pretty mild, yesterday was pretty mild, the chances of a bear waking up and getting out and stretching from wherever its den is pretty good. So, so this is just our bear that's stretching. And just a little note on that too is that bears will actually depending on the food supply, they'll stay awake a little bit longer. So this year we had a lot more vegetation and a lot more berries that were available for a later time, which meant that the bears were awake for a little bit longer. And then when bears wake up, they're very thin, they're very weak. They're going to wake up and go for their first food source that they can find, which oftentimes can be garbages and green bins and things like that. But we'll talk about that down the road. So the life cycle of a bear. So bears are income breeders, meaning that the number of cubs that a female is able to produce in the litter will depend on how much body fat that she has and her overwinter condition. So if she has a lot of body fat, she might be able to have like 3 cubs. If she doesn't have a lot of body fat, her body actually won't allow her pregnancy to keep on going, or she will only have like 1 cub. So bears, it's really unique with bears because they have delayed implantation. So they'll breed in June, and then they'll implant their eggs in November and give birth in their dens in January. And all of this depends on the availability of food, the harshness of winters, how many times they've waken up during the winters. So this is where climate change comes into effect a little bit. So you're looking at thinking of climate change and how much vegetation is available. You're looking at their habitats, what kind of food sources were available in their habitats. There's a lot of factors that go into this. And if our climate is really, really cold and the bears don't wake up at all, or it's really, really warm and the bears are constantly waking up and using their stores or food stores, that can affect the population of bears that we have. So yeah, they can give birth normally 1 to 3 cubs every 3 to 4 years. But if something happens and a cub was taken down by a predator, which could be a coyote, or it was accidentally hit by a car or something like that happened, then the bear nature knows that it's time for the bear to start breeding and they can have a shorter breeding cycle. So if you're out and about, how do we know if a bear is in the area? One thing I will say, bears are very, very tricky to find. Speaking from someone who's often trying to find bears, bears do not want to be found. They will rarely engage with people unless it's they're scared, they're protecting their young. The people are between and affecting their food sources, or the bear is sick. It could be sick or injured. So these are when you might have a little bit of troubles with bear. But generally, out in the woods, if you're going for a walk, a bear does not want to come across your path, to the point that if there's a large rock or large tree, a bear will make itself as flat as possible behind the tree or behind the rock, and you won't even know that it's there unless it's a male. A male tends to have a bit of a musky smell, and you can smell that for many, many meters. So you would smell the bear before you would see the bear. So I just want to talk about tracks a little bit. The bear tracks don't always look very clear, like the one on the right. So that's an excellent track. So that's an adult bear track that was in some fresh mud. And you can see just by how deep down it is, bears are pretty heavy, so they make a pretty prominent track. The one in the middle here, that's actually when I was walking through the woods, I was like, that's really weird that a human would walk up through that trail. But it turns out it was a bear trail and the bear was walking back up and forth. We put a trail cam up so we could actually confirm that it was a bear. And so it looks very similar to what a human barefoot footprint would look like. And then this on the left is, this was actually on one of our trails at the wildlife park that we found. A bear was just moving through in the spring, wasn't doing any harm to anyone, and we found the track on one of our trails after in our deep woods. And again, you can see it's really hard to kind of pinpoint that yes, that is a bear. So you have to look at the shape, and you can kind of see up at the top there is a little bit of indentation where it would have represented the toes. And these 2 tracks are the one that are in the moss and the ones that are in with the needles and things. Those are more for yearling bears, so they're quite small. Scat is a great way to know if you've got a bear in your area or not. So these are piles of scat that I found when I was out and about in bear territory. So I put my knife down there for reference. These were both taken this fall, actually, and I want to talk a little bit about how scat would look in the springtime when bears first wake up versus in the fall. So it can be small. The scat on the right was very small, and the scat on the left was very large. My knife is about 9 inches long, and you can see that the scat is quite big. I will say, just for safety, I carry something like a knife whenever I go into the woods, but it's always covered, always protected. So just make sure if you're out with your parents that you do have something sharp, that you do have a case or covering on it. It's important to protect yourself while you're out and about in our wildlife habitat. So in the photo that has the knife, you can see there's actually quite a few berries and seeds that are in this scat. And so that was the main component of the bear's diet. They're filling up on what's in the area. There was a lot of berries in the area, actually. And then on the right-hand side, that area is a little bit different. And there were apple trees there. So you can see apple peelings, but also pine cones and things like that. When you're out in the woods or even on a trail near a river, it looks very similar to a large dog. So it can be a little deceiving if you do see it. But it's generally going to have a lot of that vegetation in it. And in the springtime, there's going to be, a lot of needles and a lot of pine cones and things like that, just to help the bear get their system moving. I'm going to play this little video because this is a warning sign of a bear. So this is our female at the park. This was last spring. We hadn't had any visitors at the park, and so our wildlife kind of clicked into more of their wildlife behavior, and we accidentally scared our female bear. So she's going to make sounds known as huffing. This video is about a minute long, so I'll just play this now. So hopefully everyone could hear that video. The uniqueness about that is that she was having a nap near the fence and we came upon her. She wasn't expecting us because there hadn't been very many people in the park. And we were purposely going through the park with our nature interpreters to just record the sounds of a few of our animals. You can hear the peacocks. They're in the background there. They're very noisy in May. So it was very rare for us to be able to record that. If you're ever out and about and you hear that, that's a warning from the bear. Like, it is time for you to leave their space. And you'll notice that although she was pacing back and forth in front of the fence, she kept looking back, but she wasn't coming close to us. And normally she would be right up at the fence. So she's just defending her territory and her space in a way. So now that we have an overview of just our basic biology and some cool things about bears in Nova Scotia, we're going to present a stewardship challenge for everyone. So stewardship is the conservation of natural wildlife habitat by individual landowners and community groups. Basically what that means is that everybody plays a role, everybody can play a role to help keep our wildlife safe. And the more people that are aware of what wildlife needs and the human impact between wildlife and humans and how we can all live together, the healthier and happier our wildlife populations will be, but also our human populations. So before I present this challenge, this is a little prize pack that Becky will talk more about how you can get this through a Google form with the challenge. But we are going to present this challenge, and then everybody who does this challenge will have their name entered into a draw, and then whoever wins will get this prize pack. So one of my favorites is the Animal Signatures book. I carry one of those with me wherever I go, just to help me figure out what kind of animals are in the area or not. And then of course we have our little plaster track. That's great. They're pretty light, so I actually carry one of those with me if I know I'm going out to look for bears, and I can put it down and kind of see. I should also mention that it's, not everyone has to go out and look for bears. It's just what I love, to just be out and see what nature's doing. And so, I'll purposely hike in areas that I know that there are bears and things, but always very, very safely. But yeah, so that book will help you figure out just what's out in the area. So this little part of the presentation was put together by one of our other nature interpreters at the wildlife park, just to kind of get your mind going about this challenge. So what this challenge is looking at what might be around your home or your area or maybe your school that would attract wildlife, not just bears. And have you learned about a new attractant from this presentation? And is there anything that you can do to maybe reduce the attractant? And then in the form that Becky has, you can just quickly be like, yes, I found one attractant, or I found two, or I found none. And it's just a way for us to kind of gauge, has this presentation helped you, and have you learned like anything from this presentation? So what do food attractants look like? So if you look at this photo, there's all kinds of different things that could be food attractants. So first, we like to keep pets outdoors and make sure that they're happy and healthy. If you have a pet that's outdoors and its food is outdoors and it stays outdoors overnight, the reality is that we may accidentally be bringing in wildlife who are looking for food. Then we also may accidentally be feeding our pets, which are our birds, because maybe there's birdseed that is dropping on the ground and it's making it easier for our house pets to hunt birds. Things like compost and garbage, those are things that can possibly attract wildlife. This is one that I hadn't thought of until I started working at the park. If you have fruit trees or berries, they're going to accumulate on the ground, and those will actually attract a lot of birds. So this year we had a really amazing apple season for anyone that enjoys apples or has them on your yard. And I spend a lot of time, like every couple of days, I would go out and pick up just the apples and put them in a compost pile. The wildlife still found the apples in the compost pile, but it kept them from just kind of coming closer to my home. And I did actually run into a raccoon and a porcupine during my night walks between my front step and my green bin, just because they were there eating the apples. Things like honey hives, if anyone has honey hives, bears specifically love honey hives, and that has to do not with the honey and the sweetness, but they're a high source of protein. So if a bear can get into someone's backyard hive, they'll completely clean it out because all the larvae has a lot of protein, and that helps them to build up what they need to survive the winter. And of course, just bird feeders, not saying put your bird feeders away, just if you have bird feeders, there's just certain things to be mindful of them, like making sure they're not filled to the top at nighttime, because that's going to attract some of your nighttime critters. And barbecues. So love a barbecue. I love having picnics. If you drop food on the ground, or you don't clean off your grill, those are the things that will attract in your nighttime species. And species like bears, they prefer to move in nighttime, just because there's less people around. So same as, raccoons and porcupines and things like that who prefer to move in nighttime. It's like we can all live together, but we just have different awake cycles. So yeah, I talked about the fruits and seeds on the ground, and bird feeders are the big one. There's actually, when it comes to human wildlife conflict, there's a lot of the phone calls that come in about human wildlife conflict are about bears that are in bird feeders, especially the black oil sunflower seeds. For some reason, those have a really high amount of protein. And so not just bears will go and just kind of clean out the bird feeder, but coyotes will as well. So a lot of times people end up with coyotes in their bird feeders. And composting, I love to compost. I have animals in my compost, but I try and when I notice that's happening, I just turn my compost over a little bit. It helps to reduce the smell. And we had already talked about the picking up the fruit if you can, and cooking. Of course, if you're camping, this is also to keep us safe as well as keep our bears safe. Just what we had talked about, cleaning off the grills or making sure that your food is packed away. And if you have wrappers that had food and things in them, just making sure that you're tucking those away as well. It helps to keep the smell down. It helps keep you safe. It helps keep our bears safe. So just a quick review. Do not feed pets outside and take them inside at night. If you can, make sure your green bin is closed tightly. Bears love green bins. There's currently certain areas are working on locks for green bins, but bears are very smart and they have been able to figure them out. So green bins are a little bit tricky one, and they're not always possible to bring into your house or into a shed. So just being aware that green bins are tricky and they're very ideal for bears, and bears will constantly come back to a food source as well. That's just more of an awareness for everyone. Clean up the fallen fruits, nuts from trees, keep your bird feeders clean your barbecue, and try not to leave food out for unwanted visitors. And you may, out and about, especially this year, see some of these logos and things. These are part of just an awareness campaign, just trying to get the information out of, we may accidentally have things around our area that is attracting wildlife and we don't even know. So it's just trying to keep us healthy, keep our animals healthy. And the one with the little bear in the pool, like I said, bears love pools. They love a water source. And if they can't find a water source, but they found your backyard pool, then you will probably have a bear in your pool, depending on the heat of the season. So I just want to thank you so much for listening to me today. I gave you a lot of information in a short amount of time, but very excited to be here. And please, any questions that you have, we can ask them.
Thanks, Bronwyn. That was great. Yeah, folks, so if you have questions for Bronwyn, go ahead and stick them in the chat. I can get us started, Bronwyn, because I have questions
Sure.
about bears.
Okay. Hopefully I can answer them.
I'm wondering, one of my questions is about bear evolution and how they're related to other animals that we might have in Nova Scotia. Could you tell us a bit, if you know, about how bears are related to other big mammals or carnivores here? Are they like cousins of our dogs, or yeah, what's with that?
That is a very good question. And I don't have the answer to that. They're mammals. So, yes, I'm sorry, Becky. I don't have a very detailed answer on that one.
I'll Google it and I'll post it later.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
My other question is about the coloring on bears. Black bears are obviously black, but sometimes they can be kind of different colors. And I noticed in your pictures that the ones at the park have a really tan muzzle. Why is that?
I'm glad that you brought that up because I meant to mention that as well. So the coloring of bears, our North American black bear is what the species is known as here in Nova Scotia. And they can be anywhere, their pigmentation, their coloring can be anywhere from that light tan cinnamon color. So they're known as cinnamon bears, to a full like jet black color. The average bear, the majority that we do see, do have that bit of a tan muzzling and a little bit of tan around their eyes. But on our trail cam that I had set up, there was a completely full black bear that didn't have any tan on them at all in that. And that's just, it's no different than how we're born with different pigmentation, different color hair, different color eyes. Nature's really unique, and sometimes just the pigmentation, the species varies. So it's just something that happens genetically and in their birth. There can also be albino bears that are completely white, but I haven't seen one of those here in our black bear species. Of course, we have our polar bears, but that's a totally different thing.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like I always see really, really dark bears. I wonder if that's just
Mhm.
something about like where I live and there's more dark bears around, because they're breeding with each other. So
Well,
interesting.
and just to kind of add into that a little bit is that there there's different kind of genetic strains of bears that we have in Nova Scotia. And so one genetic strain could have, and I don't know the amount of numbers or like what exactly they're called, but one area, let's say you're on the South Shore, like that may have a more cinnamon color genetic strain, whereas ones here might have a more fully black genetic strain.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Annie is wondering uh, why there aren't other bears in Nova Scotia. So you mentioned that there's a population of black bears here and maybe a couple different strains. How come there's no grizzly or polar bears or other bears?
That's a really great question. So it has to do a lot with the habitat and what Nova Scotia kind of represents with our habitat. So a grizzly bear needs to feed on, it's a huge bear. So what we have here for protein sources doesn't actually meet what a grizzly bear would require. So like our fawns for our white-tailed deer are quite small, but the fawns of an elk are much bigger, and things like that that are further out west that a bear can feed on. So the four main things that species need is, your food, your water, your shelter, and your space. And in order for a species to survive here in Nova Scotia, those needs need to be met. So that would be why we don't have bears. Black bears, where they're so much smaller, they're able to find their habitat and protein sources here that they require. And their dens and things, when a tree lifts up, a bear is able to dig a little bit of a den like underneath a fallen tree, or we have different rock structures that a bear can squeeze into, and small caves and things like that, whereas a grizzly would need something very like bigger because it's so much bigger, and a polar bear, just they need that cold, and their diet is structured around seals and things like that. So it just has to do with the habitat.
Hmm. So bears here evolved to the unique conditions we have here.
That's right. Well, and that's why part of the challenge is just looking at what you might have in your space that would attract bears, because not just bears, but all species, they'll build their homes and they'll settle in close to where the constant food source is. So if you have a bear that's getting into, let's say, your green bin every day, they've kind of put that in their brain. This is where my regular food supply is, and they'll try and find an area that they can live around your home, and that may not be what you want. So just to kind of be mindful of that. It's the same with raccoons and things like that, but we're finding more and more of that is happening with bears.
Hmm. Do you think that we're seeing more interactions with bears because our population is growing so quickly, or we have new houses going up in bear habitat, or do you think it's a combination of that and folks maybe not being as good stewards as they could be?
From just speaking with the biologists and just various people in conservation across Nova Scotia, it's a combination of things for sure. So, us building homes is not a bad thing. Um, Species will move around, but just trying to find that balance of how do we continue to build and build roads without taking too much, excuse me, too much habitat away. And bears do need a large area for them to live in, and they're very territorial. So we could be seeing more bears because they're being pushed out of territories, or they're finding like smaller pockets in another bear's territory to live in. And that smaller pocket just happens to be closer to trails or closer to schools or closer to our houses and things like that. So everything is it's the beauty of biodiversity. Everything is linked in together. And there are, as I talked about the Wildlife Act, there are habitat laws to protect the amount of habitat that is taken based on how many bears we know are in the province, which actually I will say we're not 100% sure on how many bears are in the province right now, because they're pretty hard to find, compared to the white-tailed deer, which is hanging out in your backyard all the time. So the way that those numbers are figured out is actually from the amount of human wildlife phone calls that would come into different offices or different conservation areas, to say, I'm having a problem bears in my bird feeder all the time, or bears in my green bin. So all of those calls are put into a system, to track the numbers of bears, as well as the hunting licenses and things. When people hunt bears, which is actually a form of keeping that population under control, as for many species, not just for bears, when those reporting numbers come back in, there's certain algorithms and things to figure out how many bears are in that area based on nuisance wildlife phone calls, based on the successful hunting numbers. So the number it increases every year. And just to kind of give a perspective, last year there were over 600 phone calls for nuisance wildlife bears, all being separate bears. So our population is very strong here.
Why do bears have such tiny ears?
That is such a great question. As I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to take a little guess at this. It has to do with the shape of ears in most animals has to do with how they distribute their heat out of their body. So a fox will have an Arctic fox will have very, very small ears because it needs to keep its heat within its body, and a red fox will have very big, tall ears, because they don't need to keep as much heat in their body. It has to do with their areas of living, and so a bear will have, when they're an adult, they, to reserve some of that heat and to reserve some of that energy, their ears are actually quite small. But when they're born and they're a yearling, their ears are very, very, very big. And it's a little bit difficult, but you can actually figure out kind of what life stage the bear is in based on how big their ears are.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
They look so funny with their big heads and tiny ears. I never really
Yeah,
thought
they
about
do.
that.
Yeah.
Annie again is wondering. She says, they say, I've learned that bears are going to avoid you in the wild, like you may avoid seeing someone from school at the store. What should we do if a bear is giving that warning call and approaching us? How should we act?
That is such an excellent question. You want to make yourself big and loud and scary, and ultimately you want to be able to safely leave or back away from that area that you're in. But initially, you want to let the bear know that they need to see you as a bit of a threat. So when they start to do the huffing sound, it's like they're warning you, like, I see you, I notice you, you're in my space. Bears will often retreat, like they don't want to be in a confrontation. If it's a bear mother with cubs, you really want to just get out of there. So make yourself kind of as big as possible, and then just slowly back away. And actually, if you Google, there's a lot of safety tips, especially for those that go camping and hiking all the time. There is a lot of people who have safety tips out on exactly what to do for bears.
And the last time I ran into a bear was in Keji, and it was on the trail. We were hiking out to our camping spot, and a bear with a couple cubs came around the corner on the same trail, and my partner was ahead of me. And I think he's never seen a bear before because his reaction was to go, ah! And he put his hands up and he kind of like, and the bear saw that and then she just turned and ran the other way. So I think he accidentally did exactly what you were saying.
That's exactly, and the reality is that bears they move through the forest very, very, very quietly. So it's very easy to kind of come upon a bear, but they don't. It all has to do with the wind and how the wind is blowing, and if it's blowing your scent towards them, of course, a bear is just going to. It doesn't want to be around you. But yeah, so that was a good story, Becky.
I still remember that. It made me laugh. All right, folks. Well, we're getting close to the hour here, so I'm going to stick the link into our chat here for that form that Bronwyn mentioned. So you'll see if you open up that form, and I'll also post it on our social media just in case you miss it by the time we end this live stream. You'll see there's a place for your name, mailing address if you'd like to be considered for our prize draw, and then there's a space where you can tell us about the stewardship actions that you're taking at home and the things that you're seeing at home that may or may not be bear attractants. So take a look, and if you're interested in that awesome prize that Bronwyn showed us, then definitely fill it out. You can just submit right in the Google form, and then we can see that. Bronwyn, before we wrap up, was there anything else that you wanted to tell us, or anything else we should know?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I could talk about bears all day. I'm very passionate about them. So thank you for indulging me today, everyone. But I did put my email in one of my slides. Becky, feel free to pop that in the chat too. If you come across a bear, have any kind of questions down the road, I just work out of the wildlife park. Always reach out to me. I'm available by email, even if it's not about bears, it's about other animals. We have a whole team that's ready to answer any of your questions the best way that we can.
Great. Bronwyn, remind me what that email is, and I will stick it right in the chat here.
It's bronwyn.conrad-martin@novascotia.ca.
There. Hopefully you can just click the link there if you're interested in contacting Bronwyn. Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much for coming out to our first virtual presentation of the year. And thank you so much, Bronwyn, for being here with us. I learned a lot. This was really exciting.
Awesome.
We are going to be back this coming week, actually, on Wednesday the 16th. We are learning about sea turtles. So make sure you're following us. Make sure you're checking your emails if you're one of our members. We'll be going straight to YouTube Live again. So I think that one is in the evening. I think it's 7 p.m. But double check the Facebook event or your emails for that one. Yeah, so we'll see you later, folks. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to Bronwyn. You have my email, of course, and have a great rest of your weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.